Welcome back to Community Conversations. My name is Steve Mantis, your host, and my guest, Graham Saunders. Graham, just hold up your book here about gardening. I want to encourage people to check this out. Most of what you read about in terms of gardening is for more mild climates, and it's really good to have a resource right here where we live and dealing with the weather we've got here.
Yes, it is. Thanks, Steve, and close to my heart, I guess.
Well, speaking of weather, because this is one of the areas where you've got some expertise, you have or have had a column in the newspaper about weather, and you teach at Lakehead University on weather and weather-related topics. So, what was this last summer like? You can put that down if you want.
Okay. I was getting tired.
Indeed.
It's complicated because I think a lot of people think, oh, what a dreadful summer.
You hear that a lot.
You do, and I beg to differ. Just looking at the numbers, we had, I'm talking about serious frost, we had a longer growing season than normal. It was 120 days from sort of around 18th of May to into September. And then that was defined by killing frost at one end and killing frost at the other end. And sure, we had cool nights, but we didn't have frost damage in that 4-month period. So that's the good news. It was a difficult year because it was a late starter, and cool crops prospered. If you like to be in Ireland and you're a potato, it was a good year for that. And so it was a slow start for tomatoes and other plants. And probably a lot of people didn't get all the tomatoes that they wanted. I guess that's always the case.
In our area, yes.
But there were green tomatoes at the end of the year or the season. But overall, it was a pretty good year. For moisture, it was great for most of the summer, and it was fairly dry late in the season, in August and September. That wasn't so critical because if there was still moisture in the ground and you could water if you wanted to. So in my survey of people, it's been quite mixed reviews. A lot of good production. Some things like pumpkins didn't do as well as some other years, but certainly things like potatoes, carrots, and there's always qualification. I was going to say onions, but some people had lots of problems with onions, with maggots and such, and losing their onions. That wasn't because of the weather, that was because of disease and something attacking them.
Yeah, I mean, my carrots were huge this year.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't dug up very many yet, but
Yeah.
but I got some major artifacts. I figured they're dinosaur carrots or something. I don't know.
That's right.
But you talked about 120 days frost-free. I remember back in the 70s when I was learning or starting out, I always counted on a frost late August or almost any time in August.
Yeah.
But that has seemed to shift.
That's right.
Is my perception accurate?
It is, and using that same number, 120 days this year, and that's been fairly, well, something like that in the 21st century. But if we go back to those good old days, we find that the average season was 100 days, okay? 3 months and a little bit. And that doesn't mean that you didn't get bad averages in those years too. Mm-hmm. So you're right that sometimes we would have a frost in early June, and then in mid-August wouldn't be so remarkable, and that's a pretty squeezed growing season.
So what's causing that change, over those 40 years or 45 years that I've been gardening? how come we got longer growing seasons now is become the norm as opposed to what we were back in the day?
Well, you should enroll on my course in university talking about climate change.
Okay.
And that's a major component. Weather is highly variable, as you know. But over those 40 years, the growing season in Thunder Bay is considerably longer than it used to be. That's generally true in North America and Europe and other places too. So the world is, and the regions usually are warmer than they used to be. That doesn't mean that you can't have a mutant season that is colder than usual. I speak of last winter or something like that. But the overall trend is to warmer seasons, all of them, especially spring and winter and summer and fall.
Well, you mentioned last winter. I mean, last winter reminded me once again of the winters we had in the 70s, where I would expect 40 below for like 3 weeks. That was that was the average. I figured you got to be able to put up with 3 weeks of 40 below. Mostly that's gone by the wayside. Most of our winters we never hit 40 below anymore, except for last winter. So what's happening there?
Well, again, it's a more moderate climate. The recent decade, the last decade or two, has been a lot warmer because we have. Usually, I'm not talking about last winter, we have fewer intrusions of cold air from the Arctic, and we have milder air from the south or the west from the Pacific Ocean. That's more the routine in the 21st century.
And why did we get last winter? What was that about?
Well, the dreaded polar vortex.
Yeah, I never heard of such a thing.
Well, in meteorological jargon, it was around as early as the 1950s.
Okay.
But that referred to a process where usually the very coldest air is trapped in the Arctic, and rarely does it intrude that far south. It used to be more routine back in the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s. And last year we had, as you said rightly, it was an old-fashioned winter. So we had a fairly repetitive pattern of having intrusion of very cold air from the Arctic. I should note at the same time, week to week, it was very warm in Europe and parts of Russia. So it was a world somewhat out of whack. And we had the cold weather, and other places had the mild winter weather.
So things are changing, eh?
Yeah, pretty quickly. And well, something I would mention.
Hang on to that thought. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to be right back.